Keep going. Let's look at the month, or the Bible calls the moon. Now the Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, this month shall be the beginning of months for you. This month shall be the beginning of the year. So he's establishing when the year is going to begin, and when is the first month of the year. And so beginning is Rosh, beginning, and then month is going to be Kodesh. So Rosh Kodesh. When you look at the calendars, you'll see this quite a bit. It just means the first moon. We call it the first month, or when the month begins. But in Bible time, the Kodesh, or the moon, when the moon was sighted, was when the first day of the month would start. Okay, so Rosh Kodesh, or the beginning moon, we call it month. So the beginning moon was the first month, but every month started out with the new moon. Okay. So if we go again, we're going to look at the week again. If for whatever reason, if they were sighted the moon, and it was on the third day, if they sighted the moon on this day, and the sighting of the moon wasn't just somebody went out and looked at it, or it was people that were assigned in different parts of the country in case it was raining on one, and they would all agree, and they would come to the Levites, or in the New Testament term, in the Pharisees, they would come to the Levites or the priests, and they would say, and when there was an agreement, then the priest would declare it the new moon. Okay, so this would be called the first. The other ones we were 29, 28, and this would be the first day, the second day, the third day, the fourth day, the fifth day. Now, what I want to show you by this is, because this was declared the first, does not mean that the first day changed. It was just a numbering. This is still going to be the first day. The Sabbath is still going to be the seventh day, but now this Sabbath is on the fifth day. So the number of the days of the week changed, but the progression of the days did not change. Okay, so, and I say this because I had a pastor that was asking me, well, how could they ever tell what the Sabbaths were if they stopped looking at the moon? Well, you always know when Saturday's coming up, regardless. Someone will tell you somewhere on the line. It can be Saturday the 7th, it can be Saturday the 14th, it can be Saturday the 23rd. It doesn't, but you always know when Saturday was coming. So they always knew when the Sabbath was. That the Jews kept the Sabbath regardless, even under threat of death. So they always kept the Sabbath. They may not have known what the days were. They lost track of the days. Okay, but the Sabbath was always kept. And if for whatever reason they didn't sight the moon, or they couldn't come into agreement, but they found it the next day and they sighted it, then that day would become the first, and this would become in our minds the 30th. But they didn't care. The day has gone by. They just want to know when the first day is, because knowing when the first day gives you the timing for the rest of the feasts that are coming up. Okay, so. That's all that I want to show you on this, because these numbers change did not mean that the first and second and third and fourth day and the Sabbath would change. These are just the same way that in our calendars. Okay. So part of the problem was they had to sight the moon, and then they went out and they looked at the barley. When they looked at the barley and they see that it had already sprouted, it was ready, then they had to get the barley, put it on the fire, and if it roasted, then that was a second indication of the fact that this is a new month, because Aviv means that the barley is ready. Aviv I believe in Israel now is called springtime, but that's not what it meant initially. It meant that the barley was tender. So in the month of Aviv, it meant that in this month it was the beginning of the springtime. So they would sight the moon, check the barley, and if the barley roasted or it was ready, then we had the beginning of the month. Okay, the beginning of the first month of the year only. They didn't do this month after month after month. Okay, so and to find out when the beginning of the first month of the year was, they would look at the moon, they would check the barley, and then that was going to be the first day for the first month of the calendar year of the Lord. Okay. If for whatever reason they sighted the moon, but the barley was not tender or it evaporized, it was still too young, then they would wait until the following sighting of the moon, and then this month, the 12th month in Hebrew is Adar. So then, but if they sighted the moon, the barley wasn't ready, then this would become Adar 2. And then the next month, or our April, would be the beginning, or the Aviv, the beginning of the month, the beginning of the springtime. So the barley was a key to find out the beginning of the year. But to find out the next month, all they did was sight the moon. Okay? But this is kind of what I noticed. So if they sighted the moon and everything, then you notice that on the 14th is always Passover, you would notice that it was a full moon for the whole week, or in the middle of the month was a full moon. This is just something that I noticed. And then you have the quarter moon, and then you would go and then you would start the beginning of the month. What I noticed is in the holidays of the Lord, on the feast of the Lord, or when they were the 3 times that they were appointed to come, I just noticed that it was a full moon. And it was a full moon because they walked. So even at nighttime, if they were in a hurry or whatever, they could still walk at nighttime in order to be able to get to the appointed times, or the Moedim, the appointed times of the Lord, the feast of the Lord. So where in our culture we say when the full moon is out, the crazies are out. It must be a full moon because people are acting weird. So in our Western culture, if you will notice, some of the things that we establish actually take away of what God was trying to do. Okay, and I noticed this year in 2014, April the 1st was actually the first day of the Aviv. In our culture, it's April Fool's Day. So we make foolish of the days that He said. We make light of them. We reverse everything. We don't believe in astrology, but we believe in astronomy. It says when you will see the moons, that I put them as signs into you. So we look at the blood moons and we think, but we are taught, we mix it up with astrology. We're not supposed to worship them. We're just supposed to see that they are signs unto us for a reason. But then we take them and we look at the blood moon and we make the moon the sign, but the moon is simply pointing to the day. He's pointing to the Passover. He's pointing to the Feast of Tabernacles. So they are signs that point to what you're supposed to look at, not the sign that you're supposed to worship or that's not the importance. They're pointing at something. So I just noticed that in the Hebrew calendar, the middle of the month is when the full moon was out in order for them to make their appointed rounds, in order for them to get to Jerusalem. If they couldn't get here on the 14th because they were on a trip or they had something else that they were doing or whatever, then the next month on the 14th they were allowed to show up. So don't look at it like it was a strict commandment. You had to do it from the willingness of your heart. If you don't want to show up, you don't have to show up. But if you cared about His ways, then you would show up. So let's keep looking at this, and now we're going to look at. I'm going to go and give you the verses where the terms or the names of the month come from. Now, the ones that are in white are what the Bible has established. The ones that are in yellow are something that was substituted. And in some cases, the Bible will not give you the name, as in the 5th month. It just says the 5th month. Okay, so starting with again, we're assuming that March is Adar 1. If it would have been Adar 2, then April would have been the beginning of the month, or the Aviv would be in April. We're going to do this with March. So in Exodus 13:4 it says, "You are going out in the month of Aviv." So Aviv simply means, now it means spring, but it used to mean when the barley was tender, when the barley was ready. In the month of the Aviv, in the month when the barley is ready, that's what that means. Okay, this is how you will know that this will be the first month unto you, is what God tells Moses. Okay, and the 1 Kings 6, you see that in the month of Ziv is when Solomon started to build the house of the Lord, started to build the temple. That's where that comes from. Now, the spellings on these, depending on the translation, the translation that you have, the Bible version that you have, whether it's NIV and SAB, the King James, the New King James, they're all different. So I'm going by, in my case, hopefully, where most of these are from the New King James Bible. So don't get stuck on the spelling of them. Just be consistent. If you're going to stick with NIV, stick with NIV. If you're going to stick with NASB, then stick with that. I like the New King James because it's pretty close to the King James, but doesn't give you the English flavor of it. But it has its own problems, trust me. According to scholars, the NASB is the closest one in as far as translation, but it still has a lot of problems. Okay, anyway, so the Esther 8:9, Mordecai's edict against the Jews, is put out in the month of Sivan. Okay, you'll notice, I want you to notice that during the time of captivity, or when the prophets, anything after when the temple is destroyed, all of those will probably be Assyrian, Babylonian, Chaldean, Phoenician names. Okay, so Sivan is going to be, because of Esther, and she's the queen in a foreign land, is going to be based on what they call it, not what the Bible calls it. I just want you to be very, very clear with that. Okay, don't say that the Bible called this a month of Sivan. No, Esther called it because that's where she's at. Okay, and Tammuz the same way. Ezekiel's in captivity. Tammuz, this isn't where it's named in the month. It's just, I'm just telling you where the name comes from. When they were worshiping a deity named Tammuz. Okay, and in the month of Av, again, this month is not mentioned, but it says that in the first day in the fifth month the first day of the fifth month, or in the month of Av, but the Av is not mentioned, Aaron dies. What I will tell you is in the fifth month is when everything having to do with the priesthood, with the temples, it's everything goes bad. So in the Jewish culture, the fifth month is when they fast. Everything, both of the temples were destroyed. Solomon's temple and Herod's temple were destroyed in the fifth month. The priest, their high priest, dies on the fifth month. And not that he died from natural causes, the Lord, called him up. But just something that I noticed. The fifth month is when everything goes wrong to him. So one of the prophets says, will I have to fast again in the fifth month? According to what has been our custom. Fasting is not a part of the feast. The only time that you would fast would be on the Day of Atonement, because these are feasts where you come and glorify and worship before the Lord. The fasting comes after the captivity because they're asking God to remember them. So when we're fasting, we're doing something that isn't taught in the beginning in the law of Moses. Okay, I just want you to be very, very clear with that. So when we know something is wrong, in other words, we fast so that the Lord will hear us. And we think because of our fasting. But you'll notice in the captivity, they fasted and fasted and fasted and fasted. And God seemed to not listen to them for 70 years until the appointed time, until his time had come, and then they're released. And then they're released, they were captives, but they're still in bondage until the time of Christ. So their fasting did not give them what they were asking for. Just making that very, very clear to you. Okay, I'm not against fast. I'm just telling you this is what I saw in the Bible. Okay, and then in Nehemiah, again in the captivity, he calls it in the month of Elul. But the wall is finished during this month, and that's where you get the name from. Before that, you have to look at the first month, the second month, the third month, and the fourth month. When they are named, it's going to be towards the end. Okay, and again, Etanim and Bull, or these two are mentioned in the Bible, and they are named in the law of Moses. This one just happens to be in 1 Kings. The current name is Tishri. Okay, First King Solomon at the Feast of the Month of Ethanim is when he is dedicating the temple. Okay, and then in the month of Bull, the temple is finished. So how can he be dedicated in the temple before the temple is finished? And what you'll notice is if you look at the 1 Kings 6 and 1 Kings 8, this is the year before. So in the 8th month, he finishes the temple, and it is 4 months and 7 months later that Solomon dedicates the temple. So it almost took him a whole another year to get everything. It was finished, but they had to get all the preparation. They had to get everything ready. So it's in the 7th month that it's dedicated. But it was in the 8th month, the year before, that the temple was finished. Okay. Again, these names are Babylonian names. These are not, you're going to find them in the Bible, but that doesn't mean that that's what the Bible says that those names were. These were names based on what the prophets at the time, whenever they're speaking, you'll notice this. Zechariah is after the captivity. Esther is after the captivity. Zechariah is after the captivity. Esther is after the captivity. So these names have to do with where they are at and what it's called. Okay? So because she's named Esther doesn't mean that that's her name. Her name was Hadassah. Hadassah means myrtle. Esther was the name that was given to her in order for her to be accepted as a queen in a foreign country. Esther comes from Ishtar, or the queen of heaven, the deity queen that the Babylonians or the Persians offered unto. Okay, so when we name our kids, our daughters Esther, we're actually naming them from Babylonian times, but we think that because it's in the Bible, it's a Hebrew name. Okay, I just want to be very clear to you. Okay, so if you do your homework, then you'll be able to see this very, very clearly. So Shavet and Adar 2, Adar 1 and Adar 2, so that if Adar 2 comes in and this is March, then the beginning of the year would be in our April. This is why Passover sometimes is in March, Passover sometimes is in April in our calendar years. Okay, so it says that 3 times a year you shall keep the feast, or the Chag, in their appointed, or in Moed, in their appointed times. 3 times you will come. There's 3 appointments. It's translated feast in our American way of speaking, so that we think that they're festivals. Yes, they were appointed times, but the term means that it was a gathering when they were gathered together. Kagog means when they were gathered together in a circle. Okay, in the New Testament, the term is ecclesia, or the gathering. In the Old Testament, it was feast, or the Chag, the gathering, when I have appointed to you a time when you will come unto me. Okay, and the reason is this: when they're in the wilderness, the tabernacle is in their midst. They are around the tabernacle, so they don't have to go anywhere. They just go to the middle of it, and they can worship and do as they need. So Moses says, well, when you go in the promised land, you're not going to do as we have all done, as every man has done. You know, what you have to do is where the Levites put my name, where they put the tabernacle, where the work unto my name is done. And that's what in my name means. Okay, wherever my name is service, wherever my name is worship, there you will come. It says in your cities you can have any festival that you want. If you want to kill a bull in order to feed, because you're celebrating birth of a child, that's fine. But the tithes and the offerings and the vows, you have to do it where my name is. You'll have to go there. Okay, so this is why the times were appointed. In these times, you were supposed to go where his name is, or where his name is worshipped, in the appointed times. That's what that means. Okay? And if we go in it, and it gives you 3 of them, but I'm going to give you the different names that Exodus is going to give you, where Leviticus gives you a different name, in order for you to be able to see how it can be called one thing, but yet a different thing, and then you have to do the parallel. You have to compare them. So here, the Feast of Unleavened Bread, It doesn't include Passover. But in the New Testament and in the prophets, when they talk about the Passover, they're actually talking about the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Breads together as one. Okay, Passover in the New Testament is sometimes called the Day of Preparation. So Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread were all together. So when you see the Passover, it doesn't mean one day. It can mean the Feast of Unleavened Bread. Okay, and then the second one is the Feast of the Harvest. And the Feast of the Harvest was going to be when they brought their first fruits, or 50 days after the Passover. Okay, but here it's called the Feast of the Harvest, and we know it as Shavuot, as Pentecost, or 50 days afterwards. For one day, you came and you brought your harvest, the sheaves that you had, and then the priest would weigh them before the Lord. You brought this, the only way that I can understand this is you brought this so that the priests, the Levites, would have their meals that you had gathered, because this was their inheritance. The only reason that I would see the purpose of this, other than the Holy Ghost being given on the day of Pentecost. But some of us didn't receive the Holy Ghost on the day of Pentecost. We received it at different times throughout the year. So according to this, they brought in the harvest, or the first fruits, so that the priest would have something to eat. And then the last one is called the Feast of Ingathering, or the Feast of Tabernacles. So Exodus has its own names to it, because they're not established yet. They're being given. And then when you get into Leviticus, you get into Deuteronomy, you'll see the names by their names. The Feast of Tabernacles, Shavuot, or Pentecost, or Pesach, Passover, or the Feast of Unleavened Bread as one. In the New Testament, when they talk about Passover, they're talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. It's all together as one. It's important for you to know that. Okay, so now let's look at the year, and as far as where these fit in. Again, we're looking at March. This is a Dar 1. If this would have been if they had sighted the moon, but the barley wasn't ready, March would be a Dar 2. April would be the Aviv, or the beginning of the moon for the calendar year. But in this case, we're looking at March. Okay, so in the Aviv, there's 4 days that are important. The first day, or Rosh Chodesh, the first day that you sight, the first day of the year that you look at. And just so that you know, Rosh Hashanah is celebrated around September, the late September, sometimes early September, and this is the Israelite or secular Israel's first day. But in the Bible, it was in the month of Aviv. That was the first day. So if you go and you're celebrating, or you're looking at Rosh Hashanah, they did the same thing that we did. We used January the 1st as our first day for our calendar year, because that's what our government has. So their government has established Rosh Hashanah as their first date, but that's not the biblical date. Okay, so I just want to make that clear to you. First date, on the 10th, important date, is always when the lamb is selected. On the 14th is the Passover, and then 7 days after that is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or from the 15th to the 21st. So when you're looking at the Passion Week, this is real important. When you're looking at the Passion Week, the 10th is when Jesus comes in the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, or when the lamb is selected. So if you understand the dates, and now it doesn't tell you that it was a 10th, but if you look at it, you'll see that's what the case was. So understanding these dates will give you insight into the New Testament that very few other people will ever see, including the Jewish people. Okay, so now 50 days afterwards, not exactly 50 days after the Passover. We'll go through that a little bit later, but 50 days, or when in the 7 Sabbaths, or 49 days plus 1. So it's 7 Sabbaths, 7 weeks, 7 Shavuos, plus 1, plus the next day. So Pentecost is always after the Sabbath. It's always on the first day. It's always on a Sunday. Jewish, the calendar doesn't show you that. And they don't show you that because in the Christian world, Pentecost is highlighted, and they don't want to relate to that, so they changed it. But in God's calendar, it was 7 Sabbaths and then in the morrow, in the next morning, in the next day, which is our Sunday. Now, as a Christian, if you say, oh, well, see, that points to that being the day that Jesus arose, well, that's fine, except that the reason that it was the following Sunday and they couldn't do it on the 49th day or on the Sabbath, because on the Sabbath you were not allowed to work. You couldn't go and harvest your fields. So it was on the next day, the next work day, that they would harvest their fields and gather their sheaves together and bring them to the priest on that day. So it was on the first work day. Okay, I'm not trying to establish anything. I'm just telling you what the Bible says and the way that it was supposed to work. So it wasn't because it was a Sunday for our Christian understanding or Western understanding. It was because that was the first work day that they could actually go and get the harvest. Now, if they came to Jerusalem, they had already done this 2 or 3 days ago, but it was presented on the first day unto the priest, or on the first day of the week, which is our Sunday. Okay, just trying to be very clear. Okay, and then on the 7th month, from the first to the 7th, you will have the Feast of Trumpets. The 10th day, again, on the 10th day was a Day of Atonement, or Yom Kippur. When the 10th is when the priest on the 7th month, not on the 1st, on the 7th month, would go into the Holy of Holies. This is the only day in the Old Testament, in the Law of Moses, when you were supposed to fast. You were supposed to refrain from working, from doing anything, because you wanted to make sure that the high priest went into the Holy of Holies, did what he was supposed to do in order for the sins of a nation to be atoned for in front of the Ark of the Covenant. So this is the Day of Atonement on the 10th. Okay? And then from the 15th to the 23rd, there's no 14th here, but from the 15th to the 21st is the Feast of Sukkot, the Feast of Tabernacles, when they would review the Law of Moses, everyone, outside in booths, so that they would remember in the way that they camped outside in the heat of the day. They would build booths so that the heat of the day would not affect them when they came out of Israel. And it was a humbling thing. So in other words, you had to go camping. So you would know, and then part of this was also reviewing of the Law of Moses. But if you look at the 7th month, it's from the 1st to the 23rd, or almost a whole month, there was a dedication. This is why in Jewish times, or in Europe, it's the 9th September, or the 7th month, according to them, is when all the Jewish people would close their shops. And what I saw is that on the 8th month, or in August, what they are, which is the 6 months in August in Europe, is the whole place shuts down. 1 month before the Jews did, forcing the Jews, in order for them to they couldn't sell here, so they had to stay open here, because the world always tries to substitute something that God has established. It always tries to put something in the place of. When you read the Old Testament, when you do the studies, you will see this clear as day. What you do from then on is up to you, if you want to honor His days or not. But it speaks volumes to us, because they went camping or became humble, when what we do in our seminars and in our services, we go to the hotel and we dress up the best of the best. We spend money, like crazy, when in their time, and we go there to hear the word, the word of the Lord speaking to us. But do we observe this? There are some organizations that will observe the Feast of Tabernacles. I'm just intrigued when I look at this, and what I do now is, during this time, I'll review the Law of Moses, the first 5 books. I'll go in and I'll do a review of them, just because I think this is what He said to do. Okay, I don't go and camp outside. Maybe I will later on, but I just found that interesting. And then at the very end, you have in February, or in the 12th month, you have the Feast of Purim. And the Feast of Purim comes from Esther. In the 14th and the 15th day, the 12th month is when they had to defend themselves, and then they won. In essence, they were able to defend themselves, and then they were able to establish their own days. And when you go look at the story of Mordecai, you will always see that what Mordecai is doing, he's working on the 13th of the first month to establish something the day before the 14th. And it's always 1 day or 2 days before what he knows their feasts are supposed to do. So when Israel is attacked, they were attacked on the Day of Atonement. They were attacked on the 10th day, because they knew, the Syrians, the Egyptians, and the Jordanians all knew that the Israelites would be in the tabernacles that day, in the temples that day, in the synagogues that day, and that's when they were attacked. So whether we know the feast or the time of the Lord, I'm telling you, he does. The enemy does know. And the other thing that you'll notice is in our August, or the 5th month, which this year would have been August, is when the bombs were coming over in Israel. It started at the very end of July, or in the beginning of their 5th month. And they had bombs that were going back and forth, and they went in there and they took out the tunnels, but it lasted for a month. And then after the 5th month is over, it got quiet again. And now we're in November, it's starting back up again. But it's just something that I noticed, because I know the months. I know in the 5th month everything goes wrong with them. So they expect it. They know. They're prepared for it. Just some side insight, but this is kind of where it looks. So let's look at the month and kind of see how it works. So if they were able to sight the moon on this date, and let's add the dates in there, then this date will become the first. It's still the 3rd day of the month, the 3rd day of the week, but it's the first day for the month that they work. So then they check the barley to be Aviv. This is established as a first day. And then 30 days or 29 days later, the Jewish calendar is 29 and a half days. But 29 days later, they would check again. If they don't find it here, they'll look at it here. And then that becomes the first day. But for the month of Aviv, on this month, it's the barley and the moon that are sighted that establish the first day. So then we go and we'll see that the 14th day is here. The 10th day is going to be here. You select the lamb. The 14th you have Passover, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. So let's see how that works. So the Sabbath is always going to be stay the same, and then the selection of the lamb is going to be on the 10th. Passover is going to be on the 14th. And I'll get into that when I get into I teach the Feast of the Lord. For now, we're looking at it based on the way that we look at a calendar. And then the Feast of Unleavened Bread would be from the 15th to the 21st for all those days. But there's a difference. On the 15th, or on the first day that they would come together, and on the last day that they are together, they are called high Sabbaths, or holy days, or holy Sabbaths, or a day where you didn't work. Okay. It's not this Sabbath, but it's a Sabbath of the gathering of the people. And whether it was on the 3rd day is irrelevant. It was the day after Passover that the high Sabbath, or the Sabbath, was instituted. So when Jesus is on the cross at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, by 6 o'clock is the beginning of the 15th. So they have to take Jesus off the cross, because the Sabbath comes. It's not this Sabbath, it's this Sabbath, the high Sabbath. And the only way you know that is if you study this. Otherwise you think, well, Saturday's coming, so we celebrate Friday because Saturday's coming. But that's not the case. Because then Mary and the women are going and preparing the oil, because the Sabbath is near. So that Sabbath would be this Sabbath. Jesus has been taken off the cross and he's in the tomb, but they're preparing the oil for his tomb. Now this isn't exactly the Passion Week, but I'm just trying to show you. So somewhere in here, Mary and the women, the day before the Sabbath, they're going, or before 6 o'clock in the evening, they go and they prepare the oils, because the next day is the Sabbath. They can't do that. And then Mary comes early on the first of the day, early in the morning. She comes, and then Jesus has already been arisen. So when the Bible talks about the high Sabbath, this you know these because of the feast. So the same thing happens in the Feast of Tabernacles. So on the first day of the 7 days or the 8 days, on the first day is a high Sabbath, a holy day, a vacation day. You don't work, you don't go and do your normal thing. And on the last day of the gatherings, or on the 21st, would also be a high Sabbath. Okay, if you understand this, you'll understand the Passion Week. If you don't, you're thinking Friday is when he's on the cross, but he's got to be in the ground. He's got to be in the tomb for 3 days. It cannot be a Friday. So when you see the high Sabbath and then you see the Sabbath, then you'll know. You'll be able to understand that. And then again, the Sabbaths would all remain the same. And then the second thing is the counting of the Omer, or 50 days before Pentecost. If Passover is here, then you have the high Sabbath. The first Sabbath, the first actually Sabbath, is the day that you will count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then after the 7th, the day after, which is always on a Sunday, will be 50 days. So now I'm telling you that because in the Jewish calendar, the secular calendar, they start counting from the Sabbath. I mean, they start counting from the Passover, or they start counting from the high Sabbath. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then this is why their Pentecost is on Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday. But that's not what the Bible says. The Bible says from the Sabbath. They chose to look at this one. But it says from the Sabbath, the actual Sabbath, 1, 2, 3, and the morning after, or the day after, which is always on a Sunday, or in the first day. And I've already explained to you why. So this is why Pentecost always will fall on the first day or on a Sunday. But they didn't want it that way. They changed it because of what happened at Pentecost. You know, the Holy Ghost being given them. They wanted no part of that. So they created their own, their own, in spite of what the Bible says. So they do the same thing that Christians do, in essence. Okay, but that's important. I've had some people that ask me about the counting of the Omer, or when you look, if you have Outlook and you incorporate the Jewish calendar, you'll have Pentecost is on 2 days, Passover is on 2 days, Feast of Trumpets can be on 2 days, because when they went into captivity, they lost track. So they would say it was either on this day, just in case we missed it, we'll do it on the second day. But if they just followed the simple sighting of the moon and the checking of the barley, and barley is not something that is planted in Israel, it's something that grows wild, so it would always be there. They planted, of course, but it was readily available. So when Joshua and Israel go in and they actually go across the river, it says that in the next day the people went and gathered of the harvest of the ground. And when they went and gathered of the barley that was there, the manna stopped that day. The manna stopped on the 15th. Oh yeah, on the 15th. Okay, because they had Passover, and then the next day is when they went out and they so the Feast of Unleavened Bread actually is when the manna stopped, and now they could actually honor it the way that it was supposed to be. So I can tell you it was on the 15th. I went and looked at that because of the Passover. So the day that they went and gathered of the barley in the fields, the manna stopped. When they ate of the harvest of the land, the manna stopped. So it's insightful when you know this information. You see things that going to Bible school you won't be able to see, because some of this stuff isn't taught in Bible school. We'll learn about the Muslims, the Roman Catholics. We'll read about the Mormonism, but this is what he wanted for us to learn. Okay, so let's keep going. And so we went through the day, the week, and the month, or Yom, Shabua, and then the month would be Kodesh. And it's actually not month, but it's the moon, the new moon that was given. So hopefully this was insightful to you, and you get the feeling. Again, I'm not trying to teach you Hebrew. what I am trying is I want you to see what the Bible is trying to say, or the reason that He created these concepts. So when you go into the New Testament, you can apply this. I was in Bible school. I didn't know this until I started looking at this for myself. And we weren't taught this in Bible school, because it's a Jewish thing. It is not a Jewish thing. If you don't know this, it's difficult for you to understand. When you know that it was Solomon that on the Day of Atonement is dedicating the temple, you have to ask yourself, what is a king taking the place of a high priest, dedicating a temple that should have been the work of the high priest? And the high priests were there, all the priests were there, but he's a king and he's a priest, and then he's also he's taking the knees and he's talking to God on behalf of the people. So he was a king, he was a priest, and he was a high priest at the same time on one day, on the Day of Atonement, which was not called for in the law of Moses. But you have to understand that the people were judged by the rulers, not by the high priest or not by the priests. So it's whatever the rulers of a nation will do is the way that God will look at it. Okay, not what the pastor does. It's what the rulers of the city and everything will do. That sometimes the city will be judged for. Okay, the next one that I'll go into each one of the feasts, but then I'll break it down a little bit more so that you can see the difference between the day and the night. But hopefully this has blessed you, and I hope you learn it. I hope you're going to have to look at this 2 or 3 or 4 times. It took me 6 months to get the gist of this, but once I did, I saw things I'm telling you, I've talked to pastors. Where do you get this stuff from? You see things that some will never ever be able to see until they start looking for His ways and what He was trying to say. God bless.